Hey, this is Carl Leobson at the University of Arizona. Let's continue our journey through the Gast text and take a look at alternating treatment designs. Alternating treatment designs, they're in that group of designs that are meant for reversible behaviors. Let's take a look at the graph. It'll help you make sense of these pretty quickly. If you go to figure 12.6 in the text, you'll see that really what you're doing is you are just running a couple of interventions. They're quick. You don't have to conduct a baseline, and we'll look at some studies later. But in this case, I thought this was interesting. It was percentage of intervals in which happiness behavior occurred, which I think is percentage of intervals with smiles. So they were measuring the smiling behavior of these students when they were with either typical peers or with other peers with disabilities, right? And so you can see that they run sessions. These are dates of sessions, okay? So you can run by dates, or you can even run multiple sessions in a day. But in this case, they run a session, then they run two of the next. They run two with peers with disabilities, then a couple with typical peers, then one. They mix it up, okay? So they're trying to deal with that issue of sequence and ordering, and you try to randomize but not have too many consecutive sessions in a row. Otherwise, it's suggesting that you might need multiple sessions in a row to make that particular intervention effective. You can also see these interventions don't take this. Running a study like this is really pretty quick. It doesn't take nearly as long. So you can be if you are working with a client in a particular situation, or in a school, in a classroom as a teacher, you could run a comparison like this pretty quickly in about 10 sessions and have some idea of the comparison between designs with a reversible behavior. And if you notice this, you'd see that you'd have to have a reversible behavior, because otherwise you just get an additive effect of the child learning every time they used the intervention. In this case, it was just the environment. So child is with peers with disabilities, child is with typical peers, and we're just measuring smiling behavior in each of those, under each of those conditions, which I think is another one of those very simple, interesting studies. So, as I said, you could run multiple sessions in a day, or you could run sessions across days. And here, they're showing basic variations in figure 12.7. So take a look at that. So in this case, in the first case of A, they do decide to have a baseline, and you can have one, and then they have the comparison, and then they use one individually to try to show what level they can get to, and then they have probes. All right, could be either the multiple sessions in a day, or sessions across days. Here they do a baseline and the comparison phase with no ultimate best alone, not picking the best intervention and doing it separately. Here they do a comparison between two interventions and then the best one on its own to see what level it can get to, but they shorten the whole event by getting rid of the baseline. Here is the D is the shortest, well, one of the shortest and quickest, which is to just go with the comparison. So if you just wanted to do a comparison, they just did it down and dirty here and ran 5. Right. So in this case, it's sessions. And the reason these data points are on top of each other, if I didn't make that clear, so it's sessions within a day. These sessions are conducted within the same day. Let's say, again, we're talking about the smiling behavior of specific children when they're either with children with disabilities or with typical peers. So if you were doing it on sessions within a day, you'd have one group situation on that day in which they were with typical peers, and another situation in which they were with students, other students with disabilities. And what else would you want to do? You want to mix those up so that you don't always have one in the morning and one in the afternoon. You may even want to mix them up in terms of time of day. All right. If you're doing it sessions across days, you can only have one session every day. Then you try and alter it by having a couple sessions in a row, switching back and forth randomly. Right? It's this randomization that is part of the real difficulty of running an alternating treatments design. And then in 12.8, he tries to describe how you calculate percentage of non-overlapping data in alternating treatments designs. It's interesting. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Again, these alternating treatments designs do a better job of dealing with some of these threats to history and maturation, because you can make them brief, very brief if you need to. Okay, and hopefully you got less procedural drift and you have less observational drift. So you may get better results if you can keep your studies short. You've got less to follow. You're going to have less likely have attrition in your study. So let's look at just one of the designs for non-reversible behaviors. The adapted alternating treatments design. And I don't know why they called it this, but they did. I find that to be a little confusing. So the adapted alternating treatments design, it's not even really an alternating treatments design. It is in a way. Oh, it's not even really. You know what it is? You apply your different instructional strategies across different sets of behaviors or different behavior chains. Okay? So we'll take a look at that in one of the graphs, I believe. That kind of might be the best way to understand it. Let's see what they have for an example. I don't know if they have the best example here. Nine, 12.6. Percentage, so figure 12.9 is a percentage correct for group 1 students taught using static picture prompts to purchase 2 items and taught using video prompts to withdraw $20. So they're teaching similar behaviors using different instructional techniques. Same thing with parallel treatments designs. Let's see if they got a better example here. You could see that you could identify, let's say you had a particular intervention for teaching, I guess in this case it was vocabulary acquisition, and you had sets of flashcards. If you had similar words, then you could teach using different methods. So in this case they taught using constant time delay and progressive time delay. And if you don't know what those are methods for direct instruction. Very specific methods for direct instruction. I'll leave you to look at the rest of that chapter. The alternating treatments designs, the parallel treatments designs, not used really very often. Not often that people try to compare interventions that using single subject research methodology across non-reversible behaviors.